indeed do that. Get that up. There we go. Okay, now we're ready. What we're going to do is just make this bigger. I hope we'll make it bigger. There we go. All right. Did we talk about Montefiore's windmill last week? I forgot. We did. Good. So, and do we talk about the founding of Shaarei Chesed? No, not yet. That's where we're going to start. Yeah, we'll start. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we hopefully will be able to cover a good deal of ground this evening. We're going to start with actually one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in Yerushalayim. Beauty there's physical beauty, and then there's also the inhabited neighborhood itself. As we mentioned last week, the first neighborhood outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the old city, the walls of the old city, was Mishkenot Sha'ananim. It was founded under the direction of two very great philanthropists. One was Judah Turo, who lived in Louisiana, who was actually urged to participate in this endeavor by none other than Moshe Montefiore. Moshe Montefiore was the prime instrument for building in Eretz Israel, even beyond the walls. So he founded Mishkenot Sha'ananim, and last week we talked about Montefiore's windmill, which was on the one hand, from the pure standpoint of economics, it was a failure. But from the standpoint of inspiration, that windmill, which maybe we'll just go back with that windmill. Sorry. There we are. That windmill actually has become one of the symbols of Yerushalayim. For me, it's an important symbol, even in some ways more than others, which become universal, like Migdal David, which they call Migdal David, but it was a mosque. And of course, you have the Dome of the Rock, which, while it wasn't a mosque per se, it certainly was a monument set up under the Umayyad dynasty. Those two become sort of the universal symbols of Yerushalayim. But the one that I really like is this, Montefiore's windmill, because it really speaks to the indomitable will of the Jewish people to not only settle Eretz Israel, but to create a state which serves not only as an inspiration for Jews everywhere, but also as a form of safe haven for those Jews who need it. So I have a great deal of affection for Montefiore's windmill. Now let's talk a little bit about the neighborhood, which was founded in 1910, Shaarei Chesed. It's called Shaarei Chesed. And if you look on the, let me see if I can get my little, there we go. Just get my little light. Ta-da. Okay, if you look right here, this is the gate at the entrance of the neighborhood, and it said Shnat Ayin Taf Reish, and that would be Taf Ayin Reish, which would be 1910. All right, 1910 was when it was founded, and according to, I wouldn't even call it a legend, but according to documented fact, the first baby born in the neighborhood that we call Shaarei Chesed, which is right near the Wolfson buildings, and a number of our Chicagoans make that place their second or primary home. The first person born there was, according to many statements, was Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Very wonderful heritage which begins with him. Now we're going to look at the British Mandate, which comes from 1918 to 1948. A little bit of background. In 1917, the British were quite cognizant of the fact that their troops were going to be able to defeat the Turkish troops, the Ottoman troops, and they would then be able to, in some way, shape, or form, have a major say in what then was called Palestine, which was a part, up until then, of the Ottoman Empire. Now, they issued in 1917 a very famous document called the Balfour Declaration, which stated that Lord Balfour was the foreign minister, and he sent a letter to Rothschild telling him that His Majesty's government finds it favorable to establish in Palestine a homeland for the Jewish people. It's a very short document. It's only three paragraphs, but its power lasts even to this day. To this day, particularly Palestinians, but others who backed them had really demanded that the British retract the Balfour Declaration, and to its credit, it has not done so. While it certainly served as a very very meaningful step in the march to Jewish independence, nevertheless, there was some disappointment in the document in that it never called for a Jewish state. It just said a homeland for the Jewish people. But that in itself was progress enough to make mention of it as a major factor in Israel's Declaration of Independence. So now we're going to look at the period of the British Mandate. There is, here we have this monument that most people that I know just walk right by it. The Tachna Merkazit, the central bus station of Yerushalayim, is really quite a massive structure. It really is impressive. Well, in the back of it, and the street which is on the street which most buses pull in to both unload and to then passengers, on that street there's a hill, and at the top of the hill you can find this monument, not very far from the Tachna Merkazit. Now, it caught my eye many years ago, and then I noticed also that on the bottom of this monument there's English writing. You don't find that very often, but on the bottom it indicates that near this point, relatively close, the Ottoman army, the Turkish army, surrendered to the British troops. So I would go and ask people who I asked them, do you live in the neighborhood? Yes, I do. I said, do you see that monument over there? Sort of like jaywalking. You see that monument over there? Yeah. You know what it's for? No. I think out of the 30 people I asked, maybe one or two knew that this monument actually represents a major turning point in Jewish history, because once the Turks surrendered to the British, that set in motion all of the events that would lead ultimately, Bezrat Hashem, to the establishment of a Jewish state. Now, if you recall, one of our early sessions, I mentioned that on Har Hatzofim, Mount Scopus, there are several interesting elements. Number one, you have, of course, the massive complex of Hebrew University, and you have Hadassah Hospital, the original Hadassah Hospital, and the original Hebrew University, where the cornerstone was set way back in the early 1920s for the Hebrew University. But there is also there, not too far, as you could walk down the hill a little bit, and there you see a cemetery. And I was looking there, and many years went by, and I never really went in. But then I realized that this cemetery is the final resting place of many British soldiers who died in the battle for Jerusalem in 1917. And all of these monuments that you see here, of course, are graves of non-Jewish British soldiers. One grave here, also a non-Jewish British soldier. I was wondering, was there a grave that was very close to the proclamation of the Balfour Declaration? And this person was killed in battle 3 or 4 days just prior to the Balfour Declaration, which was made because the British realized that, in fact, they were going to be a major player in how, quote, Palestine would play out. Now, here you can see there's a wall. On the other side of this wall, there were Jewish soldiers that died too, British Jewish soldiers. And they were buried in their own section of the cemetery, but of course it's in the back. Now, this next picture here has a history. We're going to be talking about this for a few minutes. This building here is located not too far from Kikar Zion, from Zion Square, where it's not too far from where Rehov Yafo and Ben Yehuda Street intersect. It's like at the bottom of the hill. And if you look across the street, you can see that there are several streets that actually occupy hills, so to speak. And if you walk up the hill and go over a little bit more, you will come across this building. Actually, it's behind a gate now, and it's not as easily accessible. But it originally was a hostel for pilgrims, Russian pilgrims, who came from Russia in the 19th century. Again, as I mentioned to you before, many Christians believed that the Messiah was coming in the 19th century due to their own calculations. Also, many Jews believed that we, in the Messianic era or on the verge of the Messianic era, because they've been granted full citizenship.
I already did it.
Yes? At least on paper, they were granted full citizenship in various different European countries. So some of the Jews interpreted that as the onset of the coming of the Messiah. Well, ultimately, though, obviously Mashiach did not come, and the British achieved the what we call the British Mandate. Now, a mandate means that Britain was entitled to Israel or Palestine. And there were something like 26 mandates. That means to say tracts of land, territories, large territories were granted by the League of Nations and through the conference called the San Remo Conference in 1920. Various different countries were granted what we call mandates. That means authority to rule for the express purpose of readying that mandate to turn it over to its population for to become independent states. For example, Syria. For example, eventually Transjordan. For example, other areas. Those were intended to be set up to be governed until such time as the people themselves could come to self-government. That's what the British mandate was. That's what the French mandate was. And while it's a long story, I'm not going to go into it now, because of a certain degree of French refusal to go along, we might have had peace in quote, Palestine many years before, because there were Arab leaders who actually welcomed the Jews because they saw that the Jewish presence could be a godsend for that entire area in terms of economics, population, running things, but it was not to be. Now, among the buildings that were taken over by the British was this building, which originally was a hostel for pilgrims who came from Russia. The British converted it relatively quickly into a prison because, number one, it was easily accessible for their purposes, and originally it was a prison simply for thugs and lawbreakers. But eventually it became the main prison in Yerushalayim, called the Central Prison, which housed political prisoners. Jabotinsky and various others were incarcerated there. I don't know how many of you have ever gone to visit the Central Prison. It's called Heichal HaGvura. It no longer is a prison. It is a monument, and it is a hall of martyrs and heroes. I would urge you, next time you go to Yerushalayim, go to ask where Heichal HaGvura is. It's right near downtown. It's maybe a 5-minute walk from downtown. It's absolutely worth your time. You even can't enter any dignity because the British made the doors of this prison deliberately such that a prisoner would have to bend over before he could get in. One of the shining lights of the 20th century was Aryeh Levin. His life is memorialized and tributes have been made through Simcha Raz and his very, very beautiful book called A Tzaddik in Our Time in English. It's called A Tzaddik in Our Time. And Reb Aryeh Levin was the epitome of the Ohed Israel. He was a Melamed, but of course he was a very, very, very learned man. As a matter of fact, he became the father-in-law of Reb Elyashiv. And the shadchan of that marriage was Rav Kook. Shadchan between Reb Aryeh Levin's daughter, Reb Aryeh Levin's daughter, and the great Gadol Reb Elyashiv. Now, but even before that came about, Reb Aryeh Levin saw his role as giving comfort to those Jews who had become not only political prisoners, let's face it, some Jews commit crimes. To Reb Aryeh Levin, they were all beloved, and he would go every single Shabbos from Shari Chesed, which is where he lived, a good couple of miles till he got to the prison. And he was granted privileges, clergy privileges, to be able to go in. Now he set up every Shabbos, they would convert one of the rooms in the prison. This is inside the building that you saw a couple of slides ago. They converted it into a Beit Knesset. Now, many of the Jews maybe who were in there, weren't all that many Jews there, but many of the Jews who were there maybe themselves would not have gone to the Beit Knesset when they were free. But now, of course, when he came, it was the comfort that he gave them. And it was the Ahavat Yisrael that just exuded from him that drew them to this room and to daven. Now, by the way, sometimes, of course, we know there's tension between the religious communities and the secular communities, but this building absolutely is dedicated to not only to Ahavat Yisrael, as we will see, but to honor Reb Aryeh Levin. It's as if the whole place is a testimonial to him. They have a little. First of all, this room has his picture right there. That's where I guess he must have davened. And then, of course, they set up a talus and everything, just literally to let everyone know how much love this man had for them. Now, here's what he would do. Every Shabbos, he would walk. He would walk to the shul, and he would not go home until he had visited every single family of prisoners who were there, and he delivered a message that the prisoner gave him. He had to memorize the messages. It was Shabbos. He had to memorize the address. All right. So, and he did this with great dedication. Rabbi Aryeh Levin and everybody, they have old pamphlets there dedicated to his memory. Anybody want to share anything that you know about this particular building? All right. This is the Central Prison, Heichal HaGvura. We're going to continue now because not everything was ended happily. In 1947, in the years after the war, of course, those were intense years where the British remained adamant not to allow Jews into Eretz Israel. And the mandate itself had gone for almost 30 years. It began technically in 1920. The decision was made in 1918, 1920. The British took over the mandate. As we will see, the very first high commissioner was a Jew, Herbert Samuel. And that was no accident. The British really wanted things to go well at the beginning, but of course that was not to be. But in 1920, that's when the mandate formally began with the installation of the High Commissioner. We'll see more about that later when we get to the Chorva Synagogue. Now, these two young men, and one end of the building was where the prisoners who were sentenced to death were placed. And of course, the British had this sometimes you have to say that it's just a perverted sense of I guess you'd have to call it majesty, that everything had to have its place and everything had to have its own form of dress. So people who were condemned to die would wear, this was what they would wear that night. Now, these two young men, Feinstein and Barzani, Meir Feinstein and Moshe Barzani, two of them, he was an Ashkenazi, Feinstein was an Ashkenazi, Barzani was from Iraq. They were part of Etzel, of the one of the paramilitary organizations that fought the British and, of course, primarily fought against the Arab terrorists. Of course, there were many British rules considering not allowing Jews to have any protection, no guns. If they were caught with guns, it was a capital offense. And both Barzani and Feinstein were found to having guns, and they were convicted of plotting to kill, and therefore they were given the death sentence. Now, generally, the British did not hang Jews in Yerushalayim. It was too politically risky. It certainly risked literally riots when it happened. So most of the Jews, and there were Jews, unfortunately, who were hanged, they were hanged in Akko. But here it was determined that Barzani and Feinstein were to die in Yerushalayim, in the central prison, on the gallows. Now, the night before they were to die, they had some of the members of Etzel were able to smuggle inside what appeared to be an orange, an actual hand grenade. What Barzani and Feinstein wanted to do was to somehow smuggle that into the death chamber, the gallows, and before either of them would be hanged, they would explode it and kill all the people who were present there, the executioners, the witnesses that they had. However, their plans went awry because the night before, and they had planned this for a while, the night before, one of the Rabbanim who became very close to them decided to visit them and say that he would be there at the time of execution. Now, of course, they would not have, they absolutely refused to carry this out if he were there, and they couldn't tell him that that's what they were planning to do. So what they did is they moved up their own death. Instead of exploding the rimon, the hand grenade, right on the gallows itself, which were just a few feet away from their final cell. This is the gallows. This particular plaque is right on the wall, just outside the room that they were detained in before they died. And they said Adon Olam, and they put the rimon between them, and they pulled the trigger and killed themselves simultaneously. Menachem Begin never, ever, ever got over the trauma of that event. As a matter of fact, when he was elected prime minister, he gave a speech to the crowds that were both Ashkenazi and Sfaradi. And of course, Begin was a person who appealed very much to the Sephardim, who at that time, in 1977, did not occupy a place of political strength. Begin, when I say cater to them, I mean it in the good sense. He analyzed and saw what their needs were, and he presented it as a part of his platform. And on the speech that he made, either just before the election, but I think it might have been after the election, he talked about Avat Yisrael. And he said in Hebrew, I'll never forget, he talked about Barzani and Feinstein. He said, Hinei Shnehem, here are both of them. He said, Yehudi me'Iraq, Yehudi me'Ashkenaz. And then he said, Shnehem, he talked about the pulling the pin on the rimon, on the hand grenade, pulling the pin, and he said both of them died. He said, who were they? He said, Yehudim, Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, Lochamim. And very few people could speak like Begin, very few. So this particular plaque memorializes them and their courage. Meir Feinstein, Moshe Barzani, Potzutzu atzmam b'makom hazeh. They blew themselves up on this place. Or liyom shenitba lahotziam lahoreg. The evening prior to the set time of their death, who bet iyar tafshin zayin. As you can see, it's a little bit more than 1 year before the state actually came about. Vayisu tfilah la'adon olam. They, in fact, lifted their voices in their prayer to the master of the world, V'lo yira, Hashem li v'lo yira. Those were the last words that they uttered. God is with me, and I will not fear. V'nishmotehem ha'tohot v'ha'kadoshot, their pure and sacred souls, alu b'sarat ha'gvura ha'shamayma, went in a swirl of courage and strength to heaven. So one can visit that place. It truly is a makom kadosh, atar kadosh. Questions, anybody? All right. And of course, this was, again, a very turbulent time. And from 1945 to 1948, we have, many of us are familiar with the blowing up of the south wing of the King David Hotel, which was done Begin to the day that he died. And by the way, I'd like just one quick thing. Before Begin died, he left at Sava. Typical Begin, Menachem Begin. I'll tell you, sometimes I'm awed by his courage and by the simplicity of his Avat Yisrael and the depth of Avat Yisrael. He said, I don't want to be buried on Har Herzl with other prime ministers. I'm sure he had reasons for that too. Even though he and Ben Gurion never got along, Ben Gurion was safely tucked away in stable care. But he did not want to be in that place of honor. He said, bury me next to Barzani and Feinstein, the Kach Hava. That's exactly what happened. He's buried on Har Zaitim, not Har Herzl, but on Har Zaitim with his beloved wife for so many years, and right next to Barzani and Feinstein. So this is the famous King David Hotel, which is known as one of the premier hotels in the entire world. One of the tactics that Etzel and Lehi used was that of, I guess we would call it, acts of terror. Because if we define terror as the disruption of life and the possibility of death and great damage for political purposes, that probably would be it. And they apparently, Begin claimed to his last days that they warned on 3 separate occasions and 3 different locations. They warned the British that a bomb would go off at a certain time. I think it was probably 8 o'clock or something that evening. And the British, number one, denied that they ever got the phone call. But eventually, there were those who said that they did get the phone call, but they were determined not to let the Jew boys dictate to them where and when they should depart or retreat. Now, the south wing here, the reason the south wing of the King David Hotel was chosen was because that's where there were many British troops and administration, military administrators. And that's where it was blown up. More than 90 people died. Most of them were, in fact, British soldiers of various different levels, but also some Arabs and even some Jews. So it's not neat. Everything is not neat. When I mention Menachem Begin, I feel like standing every time I mention his name. But sometimes we're done. Certainly are subject to discussion and moral debate. Somebody want to speak? Somebody have a question or a comment?
I think some people were just unmuted, but I unmuted.
Okay, good. All right, we're moving on up. During this time, there was another event which not many people get to see the memorial to its dedication. There was a book that was written called O Jerusalem by Dominique Lapierre and Larry Collins. These are 2 authors. They co-authored the work many years ago. And what it does is to give a beautiful story of the tension that went on between Arabs and Jews, both people who claim they have a right to Yerushalayim, and it chronicles a lot of what they're thinking, a lot of their conversations. One of the stories that is presented is the murder of 78 Jewish doctors, nurses, and people who were involved in medical staff that were going through an agreement from Yerushalayim up to Har Hatzofim to Hadassah Medical Center. That's where they were going. There was an enclave of Jews at Hebrew University and Hadassah Medical Center. And there was to be free passage for these convoys to replace the medical staffs, so that if somebody was up on Har Hatzofim for a week or 2 weeks, so then they would send up another convoy of people to go relieve them, and they would stay at Hadassah Medical Center. Well, on the way, this is about, I'd say, probably 3/4 of a mile from the center. It's partially up Har Hatzofim. This is the very place where they were attacked. There was an ambush, and 78 people who did nothing but want to serve the communities, both Arabs and Jews. Hadassah served then and serves now, Arabs, Jews, but they were mercilessly killed. Bombs were thrown and grenades were thrown in the convoy, and as the people ran out from the fire, they were shot. 78. And therefore, this street that you're looking at is called Rehov Ha'ayin Chet, the street of the 78. Now, whenever you see, as I think I mentioned before, we have streets that are called Rehov Mem Gimel, Rehov Hashlosha, and this is Rehov. This is called Rehov Ha'ayin Chet, the street of the 78, and it is a sacred place. This very spot is where that massacre took place. It, by the way, is largely now in a mixed neighborhood. There are Jews who live there, but Arabs who live in that community too. I don't know, honestly, whether they get along, they don't get along. I think they do, but I don't know. Now we're going to turn to synagogues. Anybody have anything that you want to mention? You can unmute yourself or question. If not, we're going to go into Batei Knesset, synagogues. Okay, let's go ahead. Now, we're not going to get through, first of all, you'd never get through all of the synagogues, but I've selected several synagogues for us to talk about. And this particular synagogue, some of you are quite familiar with it, is called Beit HaKnesset HaRamban. It's the Ramban synagogue. Little background on it. The Ramban lived in Spain. He was subjected to a disputation. A disputation was so to speak, a religious debate in which everything was lodged against the Jews. It was a debate about Christianity and Judaism, and everything was stacked against the Jews. But they made the mistake of I don't want to go too much into it now. They made the mistake of selecting the Ramban, the Christians. King Jaime the second, that's James, or the first, had this disputation, and it was against a Meshumad, a person by the name of Pablo Cristiani, who thought that he knew enough for some crazy reason, thought he knew enough to outwit and to be able to defeat Ramban. Even if the debate were stacked against him, he would not be able to defeat the Ramban. But on top of that, the Ramban said that he will only participate if he's given free rein to say what he believes as a representative of the Jewish people. And in fact, that's exactly what he did. And for all intents and purposes, he won the debate. Plus, we are blessed with the idea, with the knowledge that he wrote the debate down. The debate itself it's called the Vikuach HaRamban. It's called the Rabbeinu Nachmanides Vikuach. And in it, he gives literally a verbatim give and take of what took place over that 3-day period. He published it. And with that, he was banished from Spain. And the Ramban came to Eretz Israel in 1267. The debate took place he was banished in 1263. And he arrived in Eretz Israel 1263. And shortly thereafter, he purchased some land with a building. I'm going to read to you what the Ramban wrote to his son. He kept contact with his son, and we have his. So I'm going to read the English version of the letter to you in excerpt. The Ramban writes, "What can I tell you about the land? The rule is, the holier the place, the greater the destruction. And the most profound destruction is in Jerusalem. But despite the destruction, the land is very good. There are about 2,000 inhabitants, including about 300 Christian refugees who have survived the Sultan's sword. Okay? 2 Jewish dyers means obviously D-Y-E-R-S, 2 Jewish dyers remain, and they gather a minyan in their home on Shabbat." So we can see the state of devastation of the Jewish community. And now he talks about this building. "We found a half-ruined house with marble pillars. If you look at the picture, you'll see them, and a fine dome. We converted it into a house of worship since the city itself is Hefker. It's ownerless. People, this is not uncommon. Many people just claimed things because nobody really owned anything. And anyone who wishes can take one of the ruins. we took it upon ourselves to renovate the building and began building, restoring. We sent to the city of Shechem, which is probably maybe 60 miles north, to bring Torah scrolls that had been sent there because of the invasion of the Tartars. In other words, there were Sifrei Torah there, and they had them brought now to Yerushalayim. Now that we have a Beit Knesset, many Jews regularly come to Yerushalayim from Damascus. Look at that. Damascus, while it is not super far away, in those days it was not an easy trip in terms of the roads and in terms of the rogues who would cause them trouble. Regularly, they come to Yerushalayim from Damascus and Aleppo. Aleppo is also there was and is until very recently a Jewish community in Aleppo. It's in Syria, what we call Syria now, and from the surrounding lands to see the destroyed Beit HaMikdash and to weep for it. And you, my son, your brothers, and your father's house, may you all be privileged to see the goodness of Yerushalayim and consolation of Yerushalayim. So those are excerpts from the letter of the Ramban. Now, the synagogue itself was identified. This was, again, it was taken in 1263, 1267, when the Ramban was there, and we were able to identify this building. The person trying to identify important buildings, and he identified this particular building here as the legitimate Beit Knesset Ramban. Here are the pillars. There are also two behind the person who's taking the picture, which would be I. You can't tell, but it's underground. Of course, that was the rule. Synagogues could not be higher than local mosques. And there was a mosque which was right near there. And so you have to go down, 10 steps till you get underground. Another important aspect of this Beit Knesset, as others, notice there's not one, but two Aronot Kodesh. There are two of them. This is what it means to live under Muslim rule. Now, first of all, the Ottomans, while there was a lot which was difficult under Ottoman rule, the Jews were allowed to act as Jews. But why? Because there is a concept within Islamic territories that's called dhimmi. Dhimmi is the status of Jews and Christians, not just Jews, but Jews and Christians, all non-Muslims who live within the territory that is governed by Muslims. It doesn't matter where it is, but here we're talking about Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh. So dhimmi means we and the Christians are protected citizens as long as we knew who the boss was. So that's dhimmi. One of the provisions that, quote, the boss made was in every synagogue, or in maybe selected synagogues, there had to be a copy of the Quran along with the Sefer Torah. This, of course, posed a tremendous dilemma for Jews. The way they decided to solve it here and in other places is to have two Aronot. One is an Aron Kodesh and the other is an Aron Chol. Right? I don't remember which one is which because nowadays they use it all for Sefer Kodesh, but that's why you will find two Aronot Kodesh in more than one Beit Knesset, as we will see. And this was a stable until 1967. Hashem, our precious soldiers, liberated Yerushalayim from the occupiers of Jordan, and they were removed. And this was a stable. Didn't have a roof. It took quite a while for it to be restored, as we'll see. To restore these synagogues, even though they're not large, took years. All right, let's see. Maybe we'll do one more. Okay. Well, I'm just going to introduce this to you. This is what Yerushalayim looked, and that's what we're going to look at next week. This is what Yerushalayim looked like within the walls of the old city in the beginning of the 20th century. Here you can see the southern wall of Yerushalayim. we're going to see next week the 4 Sephardi synagogues, they're called. Yeah, those are among the synagogues we're going to be looking at. Wonderful, beautiful places to visit. This is called the Dormition Church. Notice how it towers over the south. It's on Har Zion. It towers over the southern part of Yerushalayim on Har Zion. Right near there is the reputed Kever David, David's grave. Unlikely that he's buried there, but we can talk about that next week. And this is what Yerushalayim looked like in the early part of the 20th century. And next week, we're going to take a look at this beautiful, magnificent synagogue. Also notice 2 arcs. That we'll talk about next week. All right. Anybody have questions at all? By all means, now is a good time if you'd like to share anything.
Rabbi,
Yeah, please.
the Arabs claim that they got a document from Balfour also. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know that they're very anxious to have Balfour retracted, but I don't know that they got, it could be I don't know. Maybe it was, wish you guys luck in Transjordan. I don't know. Not sure. Anything else? Anybody? All right. Well, thank you all for coming, everyone. Appreciate it very much. And in B'yirtzeh Hashem, we're going to pick up next week. Tonight is the 2nd. We have 2 more sessions. We should be able to get things done in 2 sessions. Next week, we'll talk about synagogues, and we'll begin the walls of Yerushalayim, which in itself is a fascinating topic. And in B'yirtzeh Hashem, we will conclude 2 weeks hence on the 6th week in B'yirtzeh Hashem, 3 days before Rosh Hashanah. Haba Aleinu L'Tova. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Rabbi.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Extremely
Good night.
interesting. Thank you. Thank you,
Good night
Rabbi.
to all.
This was wonderful.
Thank you from one Myers to another Myers. Thank you.
My pleasure. Absolutely. All righty.